Hello and welcome to Everyday Lessons Every Day. I'm David McBee. When I was going through a difficult time, I turned to self-improvement books to work on myself and my relationships. Committing to reading every day and applying the lessons I learned to my life was so effective that I was inspired to write my book, Everyday Lessons Every Day, A Journey from Grumpy to Grateful. I believe in the power of personal development, and I want to share that with the world. To that end, I invite everyday people to share their everyday lessons and how those lessons are changing their lives for the better. This week, I sat down with Lee Clontz. Lee is actually a listener who reached out to me after hearing episode 32, Journaling and Walkabouts with Jonathan Bernos. I think that Lee's goal was simply to say hello and let me know that he liked the episode. But after emailing him and learning a bit about who he is, I knew he had to be a guest. What I didn't know was that he would talk about everything from adult male loneliness to the value of running and meditation to dealing with imposter syndrome. Put on your running shoes because we've got a lot of ground to cover. This is episode 40, 10 years, 19 marathons, 3 lessons. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast this morning. And I want to say this is going to be fun for me because you're one of my first guests that I don't actually personally know. This is our first time meeting.
That's true. Absolutely.
And will you tell our listeners how we came to know each other?
So I listened to an episode of the podcast because you had a friend and colleague of mine on a couple of weeks ago. And I sent you an email and said, hey, I really enjoyed the episode. And you were like, thank you. And by the way, do you have any story you might like to tell? And so that's kind of how this started rolling.
Yeah. And I want everyone to know that. I want all my listeners to know that if they are of the self-improvement mindset and they have an everyday lesson, they can just reach out to me and probably get invited to the show. I'm so grateful that you did. Will you tell folks just a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So my name is Lee Clontz. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm married for, it'll be 20 years in 3 weeks. I need to remember that. So
yeah.
Hopefully when this is finished, I'll have time to remind myself. Note to future me. I have 2 boys. One is 17. One is about to turn 14. So we're in the kind of high school and starting college phase here in the next couple of years. So that's a pretty impactful thing. I was born in South Carolina, lived there my whole life until I graduated from college. And then I moved to New York City for a couple of years, worked there, went to grad school there, and then moved down to Atlanta back in 1999, where I've lived ever since. I had moved down here to become a journalist. I moved down to work for CNN. Didn't really like that lifestyle very much, and so didn't stay there very long, and ended up as a programmer, actually, because that was always kind of a passion of mine too, at a research university here in the city. Now I'm an IT manager for a small team.
Wow, that is quite a journey.
It's not what I had anticipated, and I hope it's not over. It's one of those, I'm in that weird career phase where it's like, I've been working for a long time, but I've still probably got a long time left. And so it's like, man, what's the next 20 years? I'm still trying to figure that out, but that's a daily conversation with myself.
I totally understand. My wife went to college for healthcare medical management or something like that. She's going to kill me for not knowing. And then ended up in insurance for 15 years and then went back to school to become an elementary school teacher. So I don't think we have to pick a path in our 20s and follow it. Just, the path takes us where it wants us to go, right?
Yeah. And I've landed in a great place and a great opportunity. And I feel like if you're open to, well, it was like emailing you for the show. I really try to be looking for ways to just reach out and grow in different ways. And this is not something I anticipated doing. And I was like, well, it's a really cool opportunity to get to have. So,
well, we'll see if this, if it ends up being cool for you or not.
Well, I hope so. Hope it's cool for you.
All right. Well, tell us where your everyday lesson came from.
Basically, it started about 11 years ago. I was invited to do a study. I work for a university, so you get opportunities to do these studies that are always going on. And there was a predictive health institute, and one of the things that they were doing was bringing in people of various ages and ethnicities and backgrounds at random to participate in this predictive health study. And the idea was that you would get scanned. They have like a DEXA scan, which is it's like an X-ray, but for both hard and soft tissue. They would do all of these blood tests and all this stuff. And what I'd found was I thought I was in fairly good shape. I mean, I wasn't in great shape, but I thought I was in okay shape for someone in their mid to late 30s. I guess it was something that had always been on my mind because I was a very heavy kid, like a really heavy kid. I was that kid. And, it was the 80s, a lot of bullying, just it was not a great way to grow up. And so I always kind of wanted to be a healthier person growing up. And then I lost my dad to a heart attack back in the early 2000s, like 2002. And he was in his early 50s. And, when you're approaching 40, 52, 53 doesn't sound very far off, especially when you've got young kids. So when I went through this predictive health program, what I found was I actually wasn't in good shape at all. Like my kind of body ratios, muscle mass to basically no muscle mass at all, right? I think what they call charitably skinny fat, right? So I didn't weigh too much, but I also didn't have any real lean tissue to speak of. That kind of freaked me out. I mean, it really threw me for a loop. And so I started doing P90X, right, which was it's one of these kind of nighttime video things, and it's fine. There's a bit of a kind of a bro quality to it, but it was yeah, there's definitely a piece of that. But it helped me kind of figure out like, okay, this is how you do proper push-ups. This is how this is what you're supposed to feel like when you really work out. But then one day I done it for like 100 days in a row, and I was just shot. I just couldn't be in my living room anymore. And I went for a run, and I'd never run before. It was just something that was like, I got to get outside, because if I spend one more morning at 6 a.m. in this living room, I'm gonna freak out. And it really changed my life. It has really kind of created this arc of like the last 11 years. I've run 19 marathons now. I do 2 a year. I've got this great running community here in Atlanta. That experience has really taught me a lot about myself and about, kind of how to push through things. And it kind of correlates with a couple of different things I'd like to touch on, but it has really been like the story of my last decade in a lot of ways. My personal story. I mean, obviously, I'm a parent, and my kids are absolutely critical to my world. But like the things that I do for me, largely center around that hour every morning that I spend watching the sunrise and being out in the world and out in nature and out in city streets. And that's what I want to talk about today, because it's just been such an important thing for me.
All right. Sounds like an exciting journey and not dissimilar to mine, to be honest with you. My father had heart issues his whole life. He had open heart surgery at 43,
Wow.
several stints. He's on all sorts of medication. I'm really lucky he's still alive at 71. But it was a wake up call for me as well. I grew up playing Atari. I didn't go outside that much. I was in Boy Scouts, so once a month I was out walking around, but I gained a bunch of weight and didn't really exercise until my mid 40s. So, and I also like to think I'm a runner. I could never do a marathon, but I definitely like to get outside and run. So tell me this, is there a lesson here?
So there were really, when I really sat down and kind of preparing for our talk today, there were really three big takeaways that hit me, that helped me get to this point. Like, I'm some kind of a great runner. I'm really not. If my form is not great, I am not an expert at all, except in the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, makes you an expert notion of being an expert. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, and I've been doing it consistently. I am nobody's coach. What I'm really trying to do is be a good role model for my kids.
That was part of my motivation as well.
Yeah.
I wanted my kids to see that I could lose the weight and get healthy.
Yeah, and I didn't really have that. I always felt like a lot of things, neighborhood runs, whatever they would have, community runs when I was growing up, but they always felt like they were for other people. Like joining the cross country team, I never like that would never have crossed my mind. It didn't cross my mind because I always felt like that was somebody else's thing. That was an athletic person's thing. And I always thought that athletic effort was something that you were born with. And I realize now it's something you do. And it's, you don't have to run marathons. You don't have to, but it's so critical to find a thing that, gets the endorphins going, keeps you from feeling like a sludge. And so for me, I like the distance. The distance is the thing that makes me happy. But some people like to go and just run fast for a short period of time, and that's great too.
All right. You said there were three things.
There are three things.
Jump into those. Yeah.
So the first one was I really couldn't do it alone. So I joined a group. Every city has a running group. Atlanta has a really great one. They call it a tribe. Finding your tribe, and I think there is a lot to be said for seeking community for things that you want to do better. Now I'm a guy of a certain age, as they say. I'm 47, and I read this article a couple of years ago in the Boston Globe. There's a guy named Billy Baker, journalist Billy Baker, wrote this article that got spread around a lot. That was around the epidemic of middle-aged male loneliness, and he really put the word loneliness on it, and it was very deliberate about that. Like, hey, that's kind of an ugly word that no one really wants to say. Like, I'm lonely. But the idea that as a middle-aged person, you've got your family, you've got work, you've got your obligations, and you've got your friends. But for most of us, your friends are people that you used to know, or maybe they're friends that you see a couple times a year. And he wrote this article about how he really felt the need to get together with his friends and be much more deliberate about being with his friends. I know you were a scout leader. I was as well. Just Cub Scouts. My kids didn't go on beyond Cub Scouts, but I was a Cub Master. And so a group of our Cub Scout dads formed a book club. And we kind of joke about it because nobody thinks we actually read books. They think we just drink beer and, and hang around. And that's also true. But having this group of guys all about the same age, all in the same place in life, we get together once a month and, whether it's on Zoom or at the, local restaurant, and having that community, that social community has been really a pretty incredible thing. We're about 6 years in now, 5 or 6 years now. I think that building and maintaining a personal community in support of whether it's your social needs, whether it's your physical kind of running, like I need some accountability partners. I need someone to show me how not to wreck my knees when I run, or someone to help me get my pace dialed in, or whatever it is. I find that community goal setting is absolutely critical. And running, it really helped me kind of dial that in.
All right, let me back up just a little bit. Before reading the article, were you lonely? Was the article like this epiphany?
It was definitely, I read and I was like, oh yeah, that's totally me. I have friends who basically I text with once in a while, and that's our friendship. That's the nature of our friendship. Like, people, I would say, who's your best friend? I'm like, oh, it's Rob. When was the last time I talked to him? Months. I actually spoke, at any length at all. And there is I think some quality to kind of the ability through technology to have this constant low grade conversation through text, but that's not really the same thing as sitting down with somebody and actually having a conversation. One of my friends from Los Angeles, we a couple of years ago, we started a podcast, which we did not keep up. We did it for a couple of months, but I'm convinced we did the podcast to force ourselves to sit down and talk, because one of the things that is in this book that I really, the We Should Hang Out book that Billy Becker wrote, is that men really need an activity to have a reason to just talk. Like, my wife will just call her friends up and they'll just talk, and that's just not something that I'm generally inclined to do. But I'll talk, I'll play a video game with a friend and we'll talk on our headsets for a couple hours, and that's totally normal. And I was very happy to hear when I read the article and the book that I'm not some kind of weirdo. I'm not, because I'm a pretty introverted guy, but it was nice to hear that I'm not necessarily unusual in that respect. And so it helped me be a lot more deliberate about reaching out to my friends and, honestly asking for help if you need help with something, or being very open and honest about kind of anxiety or stress or whatever, with because it's people going through the same things at the same point in their lives.
So the book club with the Cub Scout dads is still going on even now that your boys aren't in Scouts. That's pretty cool.
It's very cool. Yeah.
'Cause I miss the hell out of my Scout friends. In fact, Jonathan, who,
Mhm.
episode 32, that's the one that you caught, he and I were Scout dads together,
Oh, how about
and
that?
we've made an effort to stay close. We grab lunch every couple of months or whatever, but I'd love to have a group like that. I'm super jealous right now, and I think that one of the reasons I do this podcast is so that I can personally grow,
Yeah.
and this is a lesson that I needed to hear, so thank you so much. How has it impacted your life?
Well, I mean, a very recent impact. So, I mean, and this is something that it's hard to talk about in a way, but so what my life goal at this point, my I don't want to say my last remaining goal. I think kind of getting my kids launched is like the biggest remaining goal, but I see that in the soon coming. I've always wanted to publish a novel, right? Ever since I was a kid, I've wanted to write a novel. About 3 or 4 years ago, I finally made an outline, made a plan, and I wrote the thing. I finished it. I finished the draft, and I was so like freaked out. I put it in a drawer for 2 years, right? Like I did
Ugh.
not touch it.
Oh.
And I'm like, my wife read it, and she's like, "It's good. You should, And I'm like, ugh. I just every time I show it to somebody, or even think about showing it to somebody, I hadn't really shown it to anyone else. I just lose my mind. During the pandemic, I sat down, I went through, I did a second draft, and a couple of weeks ago, I sent it to my book club. One of the things that was really cool, first of all, you got great feedback. Everybody's like very supportive. Some people gave me line edits, some people just gave me general feedback, but everybody was super cool. Other people in the group started to share stuff of their own. Like one guy was like, "Yeah, my band and I recorded some music," and so he put up the music files he'd recorded, and so we were like, it started this whole different thing of like, we've all got these things that we are kind of maybe dilettantes about, but they're passion projects, and we're insecure about them. But it's like the ability to be open and, I hate the word vulnerable because, well, it makes you feel vulnerable to say it, but the ability to kind of say like, hey, this is my kind of unfinished thing, and to offer it up to some folks who are not going to like, just totally. I mean, if you put it on the internet for just randos, you'd get savage because that's the world of the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
But having people who know you and care about you is a really awesome thing, and I feel like really empowered. I not only have like workable edits to put in, and they've helped me find things that I was just kind of blind to see, but I can actually talk about it. I didn't talk about it for like 2 years. I was embarrassed to even say like, "Yeah, I'd like to be a novelist one day," because it's like, yeah, you and everybody else. But I'm like, no, I actually am. I'm trying. I really want to do that, and so that's where that group has really been just magic for me.
I think that's fantastic. And by the way, a couple of episodes ago, I had Willeen Dunn on, and she talked about how creativity is divinely inspired. I don't know if
Yeah,
you listened to that one or not, but I am always encouraging people to follow their passion projects. I haven't made much money on my books, but I am so grateful for all the time and energy I put into putting them out there, because I think about how I would have spent that money on something stupid, you know,
sure.
a Jeep part, or, too many dinners out or whatever.
Yeah,
But I have a children's book that I can hold up and say, "Hey, I did this,"
yeah,
and I don't care if you like it or not. I like it.
yeah.
So I really want to encourage you, get that novel done, get it done and get it out there so you can hold it in your hand. And that sense of pride that you feel when you finish a marathon it will feel this big, tiny, tiny,
Yeah.
compared to what you feel when you get your novel published. So go for that.
Well, I've always told my wife, I'm like, yeah, my goal is to retire and like write spy thrillers for the rest of my retirement. And she was like, well, like, why wait till you're retired to do this thing that you really want to do? And I'm like, that is a very good question. And I'm like, well, because then I feel like there's no stakes. And now it's like, I still feel like, I mean, it's fine to be the old, retired running guy who writes novels that no one reads, but to be like the middle-aged guy who writes novels that no one reads seems somehow more pathetic and embarrassing.
No, it's There's nothing pathetic and embarrassing about that.
I know that at some level, but it also like it's the desire to be good at something, you know.
Well,
That's
I'm really grateful that you're moving forward with it. I can't wait to read it, so
oh
get it done.
well, thank you, thank you.
All right, did you have other lessons?
I did.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
just and I'll be a little quicker. I don't want to overstay my time. You know, meditation is something that I know other folks have talked about. I was not a meditator. I'm still not really, I think, strictly a meditator. But I read Dan Harris's book, 10% Happier, after hearing an interview with him on NPR a couple of years ago, and you know, he had this he's a journalist. He had this meltdown, panic attack, basically on national TV. His story really kind of resonated with me. You know, he was a very skeptical person about like the benefits of meditating. And so reading his book really helped me kind of understand that meditation isn't so much as much a practice as really kind of a form of structuring your thoughts, and that idea that you are not your thoughts and you are not your emotions, that you can have those thoughts and emotions and acknowledge them and let them go if you need to, or kind of observe them at a bit of a distance, was pretty revelatory to me. I always kind of thought it was kind of voodoo, you know, like it wasn't really like something that was real. I always thought of it as something more. I don't know, kind of almost kind of hokey and kind of quasi like religious in a way, in a way that didn't resonate with me. But from a very practical point of view, I mean, that's really what my running time in the morning has become. I went out this morning for a run. I got to watch the sunrise, which is just a wonderful experience. And I just got to just think. And I'm like, I depend so much on this time to think. And, you know, there's so little time in our culture to actually step away from yourself and step away from the pinging of Slack and the pinging of email, and just be like out in nature. And I said to a friend of mine the other day, you know, if you take like the most joyous creatures on earth, right? Like toddlers and puppies, right? And you put them on the ground, the first thing they want to do is like run at like full speed, you know? And I think that that's something we lose as adults. It's like this, oh, I only will run if somebody's chasing me. People will say that kind of thing. And I'm like, there are moments where I really feel tapped into that kind of just joy of moving physically in the world. And, you know, some days it's too hot, some days it's too cold, some days absolutely perfect. It's Atlanta, so it's usually too humid. You know, it really helps ground my brain in a way that honestly nothing else ever has, and it really is a meditative experience for me.
Awesome. By the way, I also read 10% Happier and had a similar experience.
Yeah,
For me, it was really interesting. I would wake up in the middle of the night with all these thoughts in my head,
yeah,
the thoughts that keep you awake.
yeah,
And some of the things I learned from that book helped me learn to like examine those thoughts, recognize the thoughts, and then get them out of my head so that I could go back to sleep. It was huge for me. It was a huge way to overcome my insomnia. So,
yeah. And it's helped me become, just as a parent, a lot less like reactive to the moment. I can be like, wow, I'm really annoyed right now, but I can kind of package that into a thing that I can deal with at a time when my emotions are not elevated, and that's super useful because
are you kidding? That's like a superpower,
it,
especially when you have teenagers. That is
yeah, I mean, I've got wonderful kids, but there are times when, you know, when you have your moments.
awesome. Awesome. All right. You said you had three.
I
So,
got one more, my last thing, and it's the reality of like imposter syndrome, which is something that I think a lot of us deal with in some way or another. So, you know, when I first started running, I didn't want to say I was a runner, because a runner is somebody who's better at running than me, right? Anybody who's faster than me as a runner, anyone slower than me as a jogger, I was like kind of a something. I was a person who ran, but I really felt like I hadn't earned the title of runner. One of the things that I've learned, and it's been through the community, it's been through just feeling more experience as time has gone on, is that we all feel that way about a lot of things we do. I became a manager of my team maybe 8 years ago. You know, like I'm a pretender. All these other people who are managers are like gifted or confident in some way that I'm not. And then you get to know people and you're like, no, we're kind of all faking it till we make it. As a parent, you're supposed to have some kind of genius, some kind of wisdom. And they're like, I'm just an older you, man. Like like, there's no bestowed wisdom here. It's just, you just know you're just a little older and hopefully a little wiser. So I taught journalism for about 12 years. And I was 28 teaching 20-year-olds. And I'm like, oh my God, these guys are going to think I'm just a total joke. But where I was compared to where they are, I had 8 years of really useful stuff to pass on to them. One of the things, and I still struggle with it, with the novel, with running, with work, with everything, I still sometimes feel like a constant dilettante. I pluck away at the guitar. I'm terrible at it, but it's fun, so I do it. That it's okay, and that's just what life is kind of constant dilettantism. And sometimes you find things you dig deeper on, and that's great. But I don't know that I would ever say I feel like an expert about anything. But I've learned to be okay with that, and that's been something I think is largely come through running and through these other kind of experiences. So those are my big three.
What do you want listeners to take away from this? I always challenge people to write something on their wrist to kind of inspire them. What would you suggest is the takeaway from our conversation?
I would say, someone asked me a couple of months ago, I was in training for a marathon. I hate to keep going back to that, but I was in training and someone said, what are your goals? And I was like, I don't really have a time goal because it's the pandemic and who cares? I don't really have I know I wasn't really any faster than the previous 18 times I've done this. So it's just something I'm doing. And I told her, I said, I just want to, at the end, I want to be standing upright and to feel the gratitude of being able to do this kind of thing and live in the world and have this experience. And I know I won't be able to do it forever. And so to make memories that I can hold on to. And so I'm not saying everybody should be a marathon runner. It's a lot of time. It's more of a hobby than a fitness exercise. But I think it's really important to find that thing that is yours, that is also something you can share with the community and to build on, right? I mean, one of the things I like about running is you're constantly getting better, especially at the beginning, and you're getting smarter about it. And I don't know, it's taken me all over the country with all kinds of interesting people to see things I never would have seen, just to be open to that and be grateful for all the things that happen to you, and even when they're hard.
All right. Well, I have to thank you. This was fantastic. I appreciate you reaching out to me. I'm so grateful that I got to meet you, and I hope the listeners have lots of takeaways today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the kindness of your time.
Absolutely. Lee, go out there and do something awesome today, all right?
I aim to. You as well.
All right.
Take care, David.
So I did that thing I sometimes do where I get so into the conversation that I forgot to ask the guest if they'd like to share their contact information. So you can connect with Lee on LinkedIn or on Twitter. His handle is @CLONTZ. I hope you enjoyed the episode. As someone who runs and someone who also learned a thing or two about meditation from Dan Harris's book, 10% Happier, Lee's story really resonated with me personally. But if you're not a runner, if you're not into meditation, and if you have no interest in either of those things, there were still several great takeaways. I especially liked what Lee said about men finding their tribe, be that a book club, in his case, or people who share in an activity. For me, it's going off-road with my crew. Yes, taking a Jeep over a big obstacle is fun, but being with friends who share that same passion, well, for me, that's what it's all about, the community. So if you're not a runner or a Jeeper, I hope that you have a community. And if not, I encourage you to find one, because adult loneliness is a real thing, and it doesn't have to be. In fact, that's going to be your challenge this week. Write community on your wrist. Find or make time to be with your tribe of softball moms, music lovers, car enthusiasts, movie fanatics, Royals fans, whatever it is that you love. Find your tribe and spend time with them. Let me know what happens when you implement this lesson by using the hashtag #EverydayLessonsEveryday or by reaching out to me personally. You can find my contact information and you can buy my book at everydaylessonseveryday.com. And if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend. Let's see if together we can make the world a better place. I'll see you next time. Now go out there and do something awesome. Well, good morning, Lee. How are you?
Hey, good morning, David. I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm so excited to interview this interview. Look, I'm gonna start over.
It's all good. It's all good.
I won't start over all the time, but you can't start off on that note. That was terrible.
It's all good.
All right, here we go. Good morning, Lee.
Hey, good morning, David. How are you?
I'm I'm a hot mess this morning.
It's all good.
One more time.